First of all, may I say mihoba. I hope I have said that correctly. I understand that it means welcome in Turkish. I have been to Turkey a couple of times, and it has been a wonderful experience. I am so excited to be talking with you today, and I'm going to be talking with you about what I've called the Freelance Revolution. Accenture was very kind to say that it was a phrase that makes sense for the future, and I'm very glad that we're using it because freelancing is a revolution in every respect. I must also tell you that I'm a little nervous following Paul Estes. Paul's a friend. He's very articulate, he's very smart, and he has certainly been a guru for this effort. May I say a couple of more words of introduction? Alp asked me to talk a little bit about blended teams, and I'd like to start by saying the power of the blended team is to fundamentally change the nature of both how organizations work and how people think about their careers. When we talk about the blended workforce in a general sense, we're talking about workforces that over time will combine both freelance people and full-time people, contract people, advisors, etc., in a beautiful melange of resources that's not possible for many organizations today, but it certainly will be. As we talk about blended teams, I just want to remind us all that this is Labor Day. In Turkey, it was yesterday, I guess, but happy Labor Day for those of you in Turkey and those of you who celebrated it as I do each year. When we talk about freelancers, I'd like to talk about definitions, if I may, to start. Freelancers are a large and a diverse population, and they are not the same as when we talk about gigsters. When we say gigsters, we mean people that are doing part-time work, maybe potentially multiple types of part-time work, in order to make a living. But they are not particularly professionally trained, certified in these areas. And these areas tend to be service areas that are low pay and low value, as opposed to freelancers. And when we talk about freelancers, what we mean are independent professionals who are certified, educated, and bring expertise to the organizations that hire them. What you see here on this slide is that freelancers are a large and diverse population, including doctors, SEO experts, anthropologists. Norwegian Air was using freelance airline pilots that were domiciled in Singapore. There's a wonderful platform called the Emergency Musicians Association, which provides both classical and jazz musicians to bands and orchestras in immediate need, marketers and engineering teams, of course. As we start to think about those freelancers, what's made freelancing possible, and Experter certainly deserves part of the recognition for this, Experter and other online talent platforms are driving the revolution in talent. Let me describe what that revolution looks like, but let me first remind you of some of these organizations. Panjara is in Vietnam and Sweden. Flexing It is in India and Singapore. Fiverr is global. Freelancer started in Australia, but has 34 million freelancers and gigsters on its site. Catalant is a disruptor in management consulting, operating in the US and Europe. And of course, Experter is a very important and new organization in Turkey. What's fascinating is how frequently and how on an ongoing basis we're seeing more online talent platforms. I received this morning in my email information about two new ones. One is called Field Engineer. It's operating in 180 countries. It's providing services, engineering and IT services around telco infrastructure, helping to build smart cities, and helping to implement 5G. I learned about a second new platform, and we're seeing literally dozens of these developing every month. This one is called XOXO Day, and it provides engineering and IT services from Bangalore. What is true about these online talent platforms, the revolution that they have created, has two aspects. One is it's democratized talent. It's leveled the playing field so that people in Vietnam can provide services in the US and perhaps where I'm living in New York on a remote basis. In fact, what we know is that over 60% of all of the freelance work that's been done on several of these platforms eventually gets to North America. So we not only see the opportunity being created, but we see a sophistication of this talent that's allowed to work, supported in working internationally, all around the world. Second thing that these talent platforms have done is allowed organizations to discover talent that they would not ordinarily find. They may be in Sri Lanka, they may be in Hong Kong, and the company that needs them may be in Seoul. But these talent platforms enable the discovery of talent that otherwise might not be identified. And third, it's an important contribution to the individuals who are able to make a living through these platforms that they might not make otherwise. As we move from the platforms themselves to the bigger picture of these platforms, what you see is that the future of the blended workforce is very bright. This happens to be a quote from McKinsey that I will read just very quickly. Online talent platforms are connecting people to the right work opportunities. By 2025, they could add $2.7 trillion global GDP and ameliorate many of the persistent problems in the world's labor market. Let me put a point on that last mention. There are 450 million people, according to the World Economic Forum, who live in poverty because of where they happen to be born. It was an accident of birth that put them in a difficult environment from an economic perspective, an employment perspective, an educational perspective, as opposed to my good fortune to be born in the US or your good fortune to be born in Turkey. Freelancing can provide an opportunity for these people that takes a big bite out of that problem. It's very exciting to me that in Turkey last year, I wrote about some work being done by the UNDP training Syrian refugees to operate as freelancers and learn basics of coding. This is so important. As we start to think about the shift from the blended workforce to blended teams, the question, of course, is why is that attractive? And you can read this stuff just as well as I can say it. First, for employers, it's access to top talent that you can't attract or afford. Perhaps you're a startup company and you don't have the funding to hire full-time. Perhaps you're in an environment where there aren't a large portion of experts in this area. Second, for employers, it enables you to be specific about the skills and experience that you want people on your team to have. For example, you can say, I want somebody with blockchain experience from Google, and the chances are pretty clear that Experter or another organization will be able to find such a person. Third, these folks are more quickly onboarded and trained for the task. They will probably have experience in a variety of other organizations, have done this kind of work before, and they don't need the 3 or 6 months to get up to date around the broader things going on in the organization. Fourth, it allows you to manage time and expense. You only have to buy the amount that you need in terms of time. You only have to buy the level of expertise that you need in terms of the project. And finally, ease of severing ties, because this is for a period, for a project, for a given set of weeks or months. There is not a problem in letting go of that relationship, although in many cases, organizations keep using the freelancer again and again if he or she is excellent. For freelancers, it provides a variety of equally attractive features. One is access to more interesting work. I'm interested in doing cool work in blockchain. I'm interested in learning more about how I can apply my expertise in data science. For freelancers, this is possible. Because freelancers are entrepreneurs fundamentally, they have greater choice and autonomy. They get to decide what they want to work on and where they want to work, the timing of how they work, and the projects that they work on. Third, they can manage where and when they work. I spoke to a group in Cambodia 2 days ago talking about remote work, and clearly, as you start to bring remote technology together with the freelance revolution, it allows us to manage when and where we work. Fourth, the ability to focus and specialize and build expertise. I have more control over what I want to focus on and the expertise that I want to build. And finally, attractive economics. And what we mean by that, of course, is that it's possible for, well, let me give you an example. I hired a freelance accountant in Bulgaria to do some work. It didn't have to be Bulgaria, but the work that I needed was forensic accounting. It happened that this gentleman was able to do that work for me in a relatively short period of time. We paid him more than he would make typically in Bulgaria, but we paid him less than we would ordinarily pay people in the US. Attractive economics both for the individual, but also for me. Blended teams add value in a number of different ways. We talk about it in terms of the 5 R's. The first is return on cost, and that's return on cost by partnering thoughtfully with freelancers. When you arrange the partnership with freelancers, you're able to identify the period, you're able to negotiate the price, and as a result of that, it is typically a fraction of the cost and the time of bringing on a full-time person, if you could find the full-time person that has the skills that you need. Second, it's a return on what we call borrowed expertise and innovation. The company is borrowing that expertise and innovation from the freelancer. And as a result of that, it's a win-win on both sides. Third, a return on best practice that top freelancers bring to the project. And I use the example, I learned this at Google, but it might not be Google, it could be Facebook, it could be any of the FANGs or any of the great organizations going on around the world. But the key is that top freelancers are very frequently working at the bleeding edge of the technology, and they are able to bring to you, without violating IP, they are able to bring to you what they've learned, both in terms of method and in technique, that may facilitate a faster and better outcome for your team. Fourth, return on time for getting your product to the market sooner. To the extent that you have the team sooner, you're able to get the product out sooner. To the extent that you have the expertise, you're able to bring that expertise to moving the product out to the market sooner. And finally, return on partnering with online talent platforms, because the blended workforce is the future. What Expertera or any of the other online talent platforms provide is an access, as we said earlier, to terrific resources that enable you to build your team more quickly, more effectively, and get it done in a much more prudent and effective way. Finally, 2 points about the teams themselves. This is some research that Google did some time ago, and I realize I'm talking a lot about Google, and I apologize. There are many great organizations beyond Google. Google looked at 180 teams that were quite successful and asked themselves the question, what is it that defines success in terms of the competencies of the teams? And I want to take a minute to read this because it has important implications for the way in which we work with freelancers on these blended teams. First, psychological safety. Everybody feels safe in taking reasonable risks that they won't be embarrassed or punished for doing so. In other words, you don't have to worry about your back as part of the team. Other members of the team have your back. Other members of the team will support you. And the management of the team is not looking to find fault, but rather to create a strong productivity base within the group. Second, that depends, of course, on dependability. Everybody does quality work and completes their work on time. It's awfully important in this context to reinforce the fact that there's a clear plan that makes it possible for people to get the work done when they need it to get done because others depend on that work. Third, structure and clarity. Everybody knows what their job is. Everybody knows what their objectives are. Everybody knows what their priorities are. And that these goals, priorities are challenging, but yet realistic. That the organization is set up to realistically complete a successful undertaking rather than shooting for the moon in a way that we don't believe success is possible, or choosing a project, a goal that's so simple that it doesn't energize the group. Fourth, Google talked about the importance of everybody having a sense of the larger purpose of the project or work. We know that what engages us, what excites us, is a sense of something about the project that is greater than simply 8 hours or 10 hours a day. I want to feel as though I'm learning as part of the project. I want to feel as though I'm contributing more broadly as part of the project. I want to know that I'm doing something that makes the world a slightly better place as part of the project. And finally, impact, that everybody sees the result of their work and its contribution to the organization's overall goals. So these are the 5 characteristics of a team. In this case, it's a team run by Google, but you could say the same thing about teams working for ExxonMobil, or teams working for IBM, or teams working for IKEA. Psychological safety, I feel safe as part of it. I feel a sense that I'm treated as a real member. Dependability, in the sense that everybody's got the skills and understands their role and their interdependence with others. Everybody understands their specific accountabilities. Everybody feels a sense of higher purpose, and everybody sees the impact that they're having. And with that in mind, I'd like to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about what that means for the freelancers on a blended team. When we talk about blended teams, we're talking again about some people who are full-time members of the organization and some that are freelancers. In most organizations, we value our full-time people, and we treat consultants or contractors or freelancers as a transactional pair of hands. I remember some years ago working for PepsiCo when Frito-Lay was a part of that organization. I think they still are. And we were joined by an executive at a meeting where I was facilitating, I was leading a project. And I remember the executive talking about how he didn't like consultants. He thought that they implied that there was something wrong with the organization. In fact, he used the term insultant. Well, imagine how that would feel if you were a freelancer doing something that you considered important. You remember, you have a choice in whether to do this or not. And you were described as an insultant by one of the executives in charge of the company that's bringing you on for this project. I'm sorry, the 5 points: valuing who I am, building a relationship with me, getting to know me, helping me to keep my give and get, what I give and what I receive in reasonable balance, creating the conditions that help me to do my best work, and treating me as a real member of the team are the 5 conditions that make it possible for freelancers to be full partners in the success of blended teams. And with that, I apologize for going over. I hope people found this helpful. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to see you in person, but hope that you'll find this information useful, that you'll join me on my Forbes articles about the freelance revolution. And with that, I wish you a very good evening and end of workshop.